Before describing the effects of taxes, we're going to describe what taxes are. Taxes, by definition, are means by which governments finance their expenditure by imposing charges on citizens and corporate entities. All governments, from federal government in Washington, D.C., to local government in small towns, use taxes to raise revenue for public projects such as roads, schools, and national defense. Taxes are important policy instruments and affect our lives in many ways.
With this in mind, we can move forward to talking about how taxes affect market outcomes. We're already aware from Chapter 7 about consumer and producer surplus, where consumer surplus is the amount buyers are willing to pay for the good minus the amount they actually pay for it, and producer surplus is the amount sellers receive for the good minus their costs. In specific, we can take a look at this graph, where K, A, and B would be consumer surplus, and C, L, and F are producer surplus without any taxes. There's no tax revenue in this case because no tax has been imposed yet.
So now consider welfare after the tax is enacted. The price paid by buyers rises from $60 to $90 in this case. So the consumer surplus now equals only area K. So that's the area below the demand curve and above the new buyer's price. The price received by sellers falls from 60 to 30 now. And now the producer surplus is only equal to area L, the area above the supply curve and below the seller's price. The quantity sold falls from 270 to 100 in this case, and the government collects tax revenue equal to the area A and C, as you can see in the right-hand corner of this graph. To compute the total surplus with the tax, we add the consumer surplus, the producer surplus, and that tax revenue, A and C, and then we find the total surplus is the area. And then you can see there is a loss, B and F, which my friend Hunter will talk about, which is the deadweight loss. The tax causes consumer surplus to fall to that area K, and the producer surplus to fall to that area L. And this makes the buyers and sellers worse off, and the government better off.
The change in total welfare includes the change in consumer surplus, which is negative, the change in producer surplus, which is also negative, and the change in tax revenue, which is positive. When we add these three pieces together, we find that the total surplus in the market falls by the area. Thus, the losses to buyers and sellers from a tax exceed the revenue raised by the government. The fall in total surplus that results when a tax or some other policy distorts a market outcome is called the deadweight loss. The area measures the size of the deadweight loss. In the absence of any tax, the equilibrium of supply and demand maximizes the total surplus of buyers and sellers in the market. When the government imposes a tax, it raises the price buyers pay and lowers the price sellers receive, giving buyers an incentive to consume less and sellers an incentive to produce less. As buyers and sellers respond to the incentives, the size of the market shrinks below its optimum. Thus, because taxes distort incentives, they cause markets to allocate resources inefficiently.
Okay, so now we'll talk about the price elasticities of supply and demand. So if there's a more elastic supply curve, there's a larger deadweight loss. If there's a more elastic demand curve, there's a larger deadweight loss. So therefore, the greater the elasticities of supply and demand, the greater the deadweight loss of a tax. So if you see figure 1, we have an inelastic demand curve, so therefore there's a smaller deadweight loss. And then if you would pair that with number 4, you would even see a smaller deadweight loss than you see in 1. And 2 and 3, correspond to elastic demand and supply curves, and as you can see, there's a little bigger triangle, so a little bigger deadweight loss in those cases.
In economics, the Laffer curve is a representation of the relationship between rates of taxation and the resulting levels of government revenue. Arthur Laffer, creator of the Laffer curve, came up with the concept on a napkin and is one of the main theoretical constructs of supply-side economics and is often used as a shorthand to sum up the entire pro-growth worldview of supply-side economics. You can see, as the tax increases, tax revenue increases initially and then decreases. The tax revenue of a product is the amount of the tax times the quantity sold of the product. It increases at first because when you have a 0% tax rate, there is no government revenue. But as you start increasing the tax rate, the tax revenue becomes larger and larger until it gets to the maximum point of revenue. But as you get up to 60 and 70% tax rates, the tax revenue begins to decrease because a higher tax drastically reduces the size of the market. Less people will want to buy the product because the price will increase a lot for it. The reason the product will increase prices is because the supply side will decrease every time a greater tax is imposed. A small tax will have small tax revenue. A medium tax will have a large tax revenue, and a large tax will have a small tax revenue.
In conclusion, a tax on a good reduces the welfare of buyers and sellers of the good, and the reduction in a consumer and producer surplus usually exceeds the revenue raised by the government. The fall of total surplus, the sum of consumer surplus, producer surplus, and tax revenue, is called the deadweight loss of the tax.
Taxes have deadweight losses because they cause buyers to consume less and sellers to produce less, and these changes in behavior shrink the size of the market below the level that maximizes total surplus. Because the elasticities of supply and demand measure how much market participants respond to market conditions, larger elasticities imply larger deadweight losses.
And as a tax grows larger, it distorts incentives more, and its deadweight loss grows larger. Because a tax reduces the size of the market, however, tax revenue does not continually increase. It first rises with the tax or with the size of the tax, but if the tax gets large enough, tax revenue starts to fall.